China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the program. Our top stories. Former US President Donald Trump pleads not guilty to conspiring to overturn his 2020 election defeat. Our other headlines, one of the most vocal critics of President Putin. These are the live pictures of opposition leader Alexei Navalny waiting to hear if he faces another 20 years in jail. China sends its special envoy to attend talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at finding a peaceful solution to the conflict in Ukraine. More record flooding in China as Typhoon Doksuri continues to cause widespread disruption in the northeast of the country. And the world's oceans reach their hottest ever temperature, with experts warning the numbers will continue to rise. Former US President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to conspiring to overturn his 2020 election defeat. He appeared in court at a short hearing, which also saw him accused of promoting false claims that the election was rigged and pressuring state and federal officials to alter the results. Well, let's talk to the Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther in Washington. Philip, what does this mean now for President Trump's next presidential race?
Well, Donald Trump, the former president, is still the overwhelming favorite to become the nominee for the Republican Party to go up against President Joe Biden in the presidential election in 2014. He is way ahead of his challengers in every single poll that is published, the closest contender being the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who really hasn't been able to make any inroads. It would even appear that Donald Trump has managed so far to solidify his position as the front runner with each indictment, with the first one in New York, the second one in Miami, and now the third one here in Washington, D.C. And certainly the Trump campaign are using these indictments, these court appearances, to raise funds, and they are very successful in doing so. None of these court appearances, none of this legal trouble keeps Donald Trump from running for the Republican nomination. None of it keeps him from running for president, and none of it even keeps him from becoming president, even if he is convicted, even if he is sent to prison.
These aren't Donald Trump's only legal challenges. Just remind us of other charges the former president is facing.
Yeah, plenty of them, and a huge logistical hurdle for this contender for the Republican nomination now coming up, because he is going back to the campaign trail in the next few days, and he will have to somehow combine campaigning for president with defending himself in 3 criminal cases that could soon, in the next few weeks even, become 4 criminal cases, 4 indictments for the former president. The most serious one is essentially deemed to be this one here, where Donald Trump is charged with orchestrating the attempt to overturn the election results from 2020. But there are those 2 others. In Miami, in Florida, he is charged with hoarding highly classified documents, and there is already a trial date there. That will be in May of next year. In New York City, Donald Trump is charged with falsifying business records to hide hush money payments to a porn star. That is a trial that begins in March, and we don't yet have a trial date yet for this criminal case, but the next hearing is going to be on the 28th of August already. The former president, though, does not necessarily have to appear in court for that one.
Philip, thank you for that. Philip Crowther from the Associated Press in Washington. A court in Moscow is convening right now to decide whether leading political opposition figure Alexei Navalny should face a further 20 years in prison. Navalny is already serving 11 years for fraud and parole violations. These new charges accuse him of supporting extremism. The former lawyer is one of the most vocal critics of President Putin. Our correspondent Isabel Nakira is in Moscow watching events for us. Isabel, this hearing is now underway in what's described as a closed court. What more do we know about these new charges against Navalny?
So far, the hearing has not yet begun, but Alexei Navalny has walked into the room where he will be facing the judges. He walked in his prison attire. He was smiling, and his health looked fair. He's not lost weight as before. He doesn't look frail. He was allowed to interact with his co-partner, who is also facing 10 years in prison. And so far, his lawyers have also been allowed in, and they walked in and talked to him and exchanged talks with him. Outside the courtroom, there are few groups of people who are gathered in small groups, seated outside in the compound. And I saw just one person protesting, holding a placard. I was not able to read what was written in the placard. But we also know that a few accredited journalists have also been allowed in the courtroom. It will be a closed-door hearing, and the verdict is expected to be passed today. We know that Alexei Navalny is facing charges related to inciting and financing extremism. His organizations and offices, office branches in Moscow have been closed, and a few of his colleagues are also in prison with him. And anyone who is found to be, relating with him or sharing his videos could also face the same charges of extremism, because the government, bonded the two, terrorism and extremism, together. So once you're found doing that, that means you could face up to 20 years in prison. That's the maximum sentence. In that, of course, he's been charged with, in the past, he's been charged with sharing videos of alleged corruption in the government, and this gained him a lot of social media following.
Isabel, we'll come back to you in the next hour or so as proceedings develop. Our correspondent Isabel Nakira in Moscow. A Russian warship has reportedly been damaged by Ukrainian sea drones in the Black Sea. Moscow says it blocked the drones before they were able to hit their target. But footage on social media shows the ship taking on water as it was towed back to the naval base of Novorossiysk. Ukraine says the vessel, which had 100 crew on board, dropped out of combat missions after the strike. Operators of the local oil terminal say all shipping activity at the port was temporarily halted. Russia has not yet responded. One of China's top diplomats is to attend talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at finding a peaceful solution to the conflict in Ukraine. Special Envoy for Eurasian Affairs, Li Hui, will meet senior officials from around 40 countries in Jeddah. China's foreign ministry says Beijing is willing to work with the international community to achieve a political solution to end the crisis. A 6-month ceasefire has been agreed between the Colombian government and the country's largest remaining guerrilla group. President Gustavo Petro has met the leaders of the ELN in Bogotá for the first time. The two sides resumed peace talks a year ago after Petro took office. He's made total peace a cornerstone of his administration. Niger's President Mohamed Bazoum has claimed he's being held hostage by the military junta who've taken power. Writing in the Washington Post, he's warned that the entire Sahel region of Africa could fall to Russian influence if the coup leaders are successful. He's urged the international community to help restore order and avoid what he's called devastating consequences. But the first attempt to bring stability to Niger appears not to have worked. A West African delegation has now left the country after failing to secure a return to power for the country's elected government, with the weekend deadline looming large. Let's talk to our correspondent Deji Badmus in Lagos in neighbouring Nigeria. Deji, so these initial talks seem to have failed.
Yeah, you're quite right, even though we do not have the details yet. That talk, of course, was led, the negotiation now was led by the former Nigerian military leader, General Abdul Salami Abubakar. He was in Niamey. He was accompanied now on that trip by a well-respected religious leader in Nigeria. And unfortunately, they were not able to meet with General Tiani. So obviously, their first mission has failed. They've come back to Nigeria. They will report to President Bola Tinubu, who would then pass the message on to the General ECOWAS body. But I'm sure this is not the end of their mission. So that they may be asked to return. We just have to wait and see what happens. But of course, there's been significant development in Niger. The coup leaders have lifted the curfew in that country. And of course, as you know, the ECOWAS defense chiefs have been meeting in Abuja. That meeting is expected to end today, and then a decision will be taken. Whatever decision is taken will be passed on to the authority of heads of state for a final decision now as to whether the shape now that that military intervention will be. But don't forget, ECOWAS has said any form of military intervention at all would be a last resort. But then the coup leaders in Niger have threatened that if there was any form of attack against the country, that they were going to retaliate and target the nearest country close to them. Now, that would imply they're talking about Nigeria, but that's what they have said, that they're going to retaliate. Besides, they've also recalled, they've actually terminated the mandates now of the country's ambassadors to Nigeria, the United States, and some other countries. So quite significant developments on Niger, but we're all waiting to see what happens next.
Deji, keep us posted. Thank you for that. Our correspondent Deji Badmus in neighbouring Nigeria. Well, the leaders of the coup in Niger have moved to end a number of military cooperation agreements with France. But Paris has responded by saying only the legitimate government of Niger can carry out such a move. Currently around 1,500 French troops in the country, but counter-terrorism operations have been suspended since the ousting of President Mahmoud Bazoum. Our correspondent Ross Cullen explains.
The ruling military in Niger said that, quote, faced with France's nonchalant attitude in reaction to the situation, we have decided to denounce the cooperation agreements in the field of security and defence with this state. The move could well lead to France withdrawing its forces from another West African country. France pulled its forces out of Mali and Burkina Faso after military coups in both countries and moved the core of its operations in the southern Sahara to Niger. The soldiers seen here are withdrawing from Mali in August 2022, 1 year ago. French troops are in the region to help disrupt and dismantle armed groups, but the immediate future of the mission in Niger is now uncertain after the Nigerian army rulers revoked a raft of military cooperation agreements. In recent days, since the army deposed the sitting president, there have been major demonstrations in the capital, Niamey. France has been the target of a lot of the protesters' anger, with anti-France slogans being chanted and the country's embassy building attacked. The military junta has also taken the French TV channel France 24 and the radio station RFI off air. It's a decision that the EU and the French government have denounced, saying, quote, the measures taken against the press are part of a context of authoritarian repression carried out by the authors of the attempted coup. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, China sees more record flooding as Typhoon Doksuri continues to cause widespread disruption in the northeast of the country.
Roger, Ricky, loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
We hope it will happen.
we have to live it out.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN, see the difference.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Former US President Donald Trump pleads not guilty in Washington, denying accusations that he tried to overturn the 2020 election results. Our other headlines: one of the most vocal critics of President Putin, the opposition leader Alexei Navalny, has been sentenced to another 19 years in jail. And China sends its special envoy to attend talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at finding a peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine. At least 6 people have now been killed and around 35 are missing after a landslide in Georgia's mountainous Raqqa region. Rescue workers were unable to get to the site for several hours and are now searching through debris buried under thick mud. This is the first time a landslide of this size has happened in the popular holiday destination. Northeast China's Heilongjiang province has been hit by record flooding after days of torrential rain caused by Typhoon Doksuri. The flood alert level has been raised to its highest level as 2 major rivers near the capital, Harbin, overflowed. Wuchang City, one of China's main areas for rice production, has also been hit by these floods. Thousands of people have been forced to leave their homes. Well, rescue operations are still underway in the city of Giorgio, one of the worst hit areas. Volunteers are providing crucial support to the emergency services. Our correspondent Chen Munfei reports.
Damaged rescue boats are carried to a makeshift repair site at the team's base camp. Many have been damaged by debris and other objects carried by the floodwaters. These workers have brought materials from their tent factory and are now helping with the repair work. Requests for assistance keep coming in. They've been working around the clock. Vessels that require more serious repairs are sent to their nearby factory. One rescue team from out of town says they were guided here by a local volunteer. This woman is trying to help by using her phone.
救援队需要什么，我们就去找什么。然后，因为一个人的力量是有限的，发到朋友圈，大家都会转发。
最需要的就是油料哈。
主要就是油，朋友圈有发的我们就打电话，有发的我们就打电话。
People from outside Hebei province have driven through the night to bring food to the rescue workers after seeing the situation in Zhuozhou on social media.
我本来就是做救援的，但是我们后勤保障的人不太多嘛，就想着让他们在这救援的同时能吃上一口热饭。
This team of 2 drove 10 hours from the coastal province of Shandong to bring rescue workers a batch of their specialty pancakes. The Zhuozhou government said on Thursday that it welcomes monetary and material support to help with flood control and relief work. Chen Mengfei, CGTN, Hebei, Zhuozhou.
Well, one group of volunteers working in Giorgio is the Jiangsu Blue Sky Rescue Team. The group's leader spoke to CGTN Europe's reporter Wang Jiwei.
In the past 3 days, we've been trying to rescue people who were stranded in buildings and on small islands using our boat. We worked up to 15 hours per day. The most difficult part is transporting people because they're stranded on small islands surrounded by floods. Transporting them from land by water and heading to the next destination is challenging as the islands are separated from each other.
What kind of support do the residents of Zhuozhou still need?
We have rescued most people in the worst flood-hit region of the city. However, there are still some people who wish to stay in their homes. Many of the stranded people were in urgent need of food, water and medication, and we will still send these supplies to them.
What kind of people do you have in the team?
Our team is made up of volunteers from around China. They're aged between 35 and 45, and they come from all walks of life.
How did you get into this in the first place?
I've always wanted to help people in need, and by joining the volunteer team, I also learned some useful rescuing skills. I think it's a really good experience for me.
The world's oceans have hit their hottest ever recorded temperature, and experts warn that figure is likely to keep rising. The daily average sea surface temperature reached 20.96 Celsius this week, far higher than it should be at this time of year. The oceans are usually at their hottest in March. Well, let's talk to Dr. Matt Frost, Head of International Office at Plymouth Marine Laboratory. Dr. Frost, welcome to the programme. Good to see you. In simple terms, for those of us who are not scientists, what does all this record-breaking temperature of the ocean surface mean for marine life?
Well, marine life can be affected in two ways. I mean, firstly, there's the direct impact of things that can't move around, and it's just too hot for them to reproduce or too hot for them to function normally, and in extreme cases, too hot for them to survive. And most people are familiar with things like coral bleaching, where it gets too hot and the coral expels some of the algae, and we see that. But it also means a lot of other species are moving around, so those able to, they might move north or south and around in the ocean. But of course, because everything's connected, that then has a knock-on effect. So some small fish or plankton may move somewhere else because it's too hot, but that's actually food for another species. So what you're seeing really is impacts that are happening right across the ecosystem.
The oceans perform a key function in cooling down our planet. Are there short-term ways to try to stabilise their temperature?
You know, I wish the answer to that was yes. You're exactly right. I mean, the ocean absorbs much of the carbon dioxide that it is currently pumped into the atmosphere and performs this great service for the globe. Unfortunately, because of the way this works, there is a lag. You know, there's going to be increasing temperature, air temperature and sea surface temperature will increase probably for years, if not decades to come. So there's no short-term fix. What we can do, however, is two things. Firstly, we can look at adaptation. So how can we start adapting to the reality that we now have, these warmer seas? And I think the second thing is to say, well, we need to start dealing with the source of this problem. We need to deal with it now because, yes, there may be a lag and we're stuck with this for a few years or decades, but there is still time. And if we don't do anything, we can be stuck with it permanently.
You say there's time. In your judgment, how much time would you say we have to act on this before it's too late?
Well, it's difficult to say what's too late because I lead a project. We've been monitoring the impacts in increasing temperature for nearly 20 years. And we've been saying for the last 20 years, it's getting hotter. We've been showing impacts on marine life. And at the time, we didn't really see it as, we knew it was important, but we thought we had some time to deal with it. I would say really now we have to act now. I mean, this is the point. So I don't want to give the impression that we can sit back and say, well, we've got lots of time to come up with ideas. I think we need to act now to stop the increasing temperature and deal with the source of the problem. There's no time for us to sit back and just sort of twiddle our thumbs anymore, I'm afraid.
Dr. Matt Frost, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Dr. Frost from Plymouth Marine Laboratory.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Unions in Hungary say thousands of teachers are abandoning their profession. A wave of resignations began after Parliament adopted a new law last month that teachers say increases their workload and restricts their rights. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports.
Anna Kovacs has worked at her current school for the past 7 years, but today she's carrying her resignation letter.
No one wants to be a teacher with these conditions, with this payment.
The so-called status law passed with the support of most of Hungary's members of parliament, where Prime Minister Viktor Orban's party holds a 2/3 majority. According to the country's teachers' union, the new measure raises the number of weekly teaching hours and limits their autonomy. The government can also relocate teachers at any given time.
The future of students in Hungary is now in danger. They will not receive a quality education, which is something this government must ensure.
Hungary's government says the new law will benefit the country's education system. In a statement released after the adoption of the legislation, it said the new law aims to improve the social, professional, and financial standing of teachers and educators. Lawmakers also argue it will ensure steady wage increases, but it has linked those pay hikes to the receipt of EU funds, which are currently blocked due to concerns in Brussels over allegations of corruption and rule of law conflicts in Hungary.
Hungary's teachers' union says it expects the wave of resignations to continue right up to the start of the upcoming school year in September. They warn that many classrooms will be without teachers when students return.
Anna Kovacs says most of her colleagues are disillusioned and burnt out. It follows nearly a year of protest where they demanded better conditions. Now huge numbers are leaving the jobs they once loved.
It will be really interesting in September what will happen, or in October, when everyone realizes that their children don't have teachers. Math or biology, chemistry, there are no teachers on the market.
Teachers say the new law has put the education of an entire generation of Hungarian students at risk, which will have consequences far beyond the classroom. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Budapest.
The headlines again. While we've been on air, one of the most vocal critics of President Vladimir Putin, the opposition leader Alexei Navalny, has been sentenced to another 19 years in jail. Our other headlines: former US President Donald Trump pleads not guilty to conspiring to overturn his 2020 election defeat. And China sends its special envoy to attend the talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at trying to find a peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.